Welcome to ETM 260 Computer Aided Design. This is Lecture 11, Drawing Tools in NX. When invoking the drafting environment in NX, it is important to use the proper units, which corresponds to the units that you use to create your parts, and also to select the proper size of the paper. That depends on what is available for you to print in your application. For letter size, the dimensions that we're going to use are going to correspond to ANSI A, which is also A4 for the millimeters quantities. So now let's do it in NX. To do that, we're going to open a new file. We're going to click on the Drawing tab. We're going to use millimeters, and we're going to use A4. At this moment, you have the chance of creating a relationship between a part in here, or you could create that part inside in the wizard. For the time being, we're gonna do it as a standalone part, and then we're gonna click OK. So notice that the first thing that NX shows is a population of the title block. This is the default title block that you will have given by NX. You could populate it right at this moment, or you will be able, or I'll show you how to populate it later on in the lecture. For now, let's go into create the different views using the wizard. So we're gonna do view creation. We're going to make sure that this is clicked, and we're gonna say yes. And then it brings you to a menu to choose the part that you would like to create a drawing for. We're going to do articulation rod, which we used in the previous lecture. And then we're going to follow the instructions. We're going to go into next. For now, we're going to keep it shaded. However, notice that you have multiple choices. We're going to go into next. The first thing that you need to select is the parent view. As a drawing, the parent view should be a front view, unless your part is more complex and requires other type of base view. Then we're going to next, and then notice that the front view is given as the parent view, and then you could select the ones that you want to be related. So we select the top view, the right view, and we're gonna do the isometric views. Once you have made the selection, notice that in next and you click finish, notice that in next will be able to create the 4 views aligned properly for that particular part. Notice that NX provides a scale of the views in order to make sure that all the features fit into the paper. But sometimes it's either too big or too small. So we would like to change them one by one. The requirement is that the scale of the parent view has to be exactly the same as the one that are children of those views. However, the scale of the isometric doesn't have to be the same scale as those primary views. To change the size of the scale of the view, simply right click, go into settings, and when you go into settings, notice that you're going to have general, and this scale we have is 1 to 5, meaning that the scale is 5 times smaller than the actual size that we have. Let's try to see if we could fit something 1 to 2, which is half the size. Now that we have it, notice that we could relocate it, and let's try to do that for all the views. Remember, the views, primary views, have to have exactly the same scale. Now notice that we're able to see a little bit more details in each one of the views. Now that we have changed the scale of the views, what we want to do is remove the border of the views to make the drawing a little bit less confusing. So we're going to go into Menu, Preferences, and Drafting. And notice that inside of here, you're going to have a whole bunch of different menus. We're going to go into drawing format, drawing view, And under workflow, notice that you have display, and we're gonna unclick it and then say OK. Now notice that the sketch looks a little bit better. Depending on how you want your drawing to look like, you could change the display of each one of the views. For example, if you click on the view and you go into the settings, you could change a whole bunch of different information as is shown over here. For example, in this case we have the visible lines and I have a thickness. As a default, you could change the thickness if your drawing is very busy. For example, if you are required to show the hidden lines, notice that by default they're done invisible. You could change them so that they do dashed, and you could change the thickness of those lines. So we could do something like this and show it, and notice that now the hidden lines will be able to show in that particular view. If you want the views to be shown in each one of the views, you need to unfortunately do the process for each one of the views. The next step is to add dimensions into each one of the views. To add dimensions, it is basically done in the same way that you add dimensions in a sketch. We have the dimension menu over here. You have either linear dimensions, you have radial dimensions, angular dimensions, and so on and so forth. For example, linear dimensions, you want to choose from one point to the next, and you create a location, whether it's in vertical or horizontal, in the same way that we did it in the sketches. For example, we could go from here to here and have it in this. We could also add radial dimensions. By default, if you have a whole circle, you want to provide a diameter as a dimension. However, if you have a arc, you want to provide a radius. So notice that in this case it has a diameter. We would like to modify it, and instead of having diametral dimension, you do a radial dimension. You could also do angles if that's what you need. For example, the angle between this line and this line, it will be a 90-degree angle. And you have to add as many dimensions to make your sketch fully dimensional, so somebody else who comes and sees the sketch will be able to duplicate your part and create it completely. Another rule is that if you do not have a dimension in a view, then that view it is not necessary for your particular sketch. Make sure that you use the techniques learned on the previous lecture in order to complete this drawing successfully. Now let's go over how to change a specific unit or a specific measurement. So let's double click on the measurement and notice a menu will show up. The idea of this menu is that this tells you the type of measurement that it is. For example, in this case it's horizontal, and you will be able to change it if you need to. You could also add tolerance in, depending of the measurement that you have, if that particular value has a type of tolerance in, and then you will have all the different ones of tolerance in that you want. This one, if you want to have it as an inspection dimension, that all depends on the type of drawing that you evaluate. This also will allow you to change the orientation of your text. Notice that in this case it's horizontal because the dimension that you have is horizontal. However, you could change the position where it goes. In this case it's in top of the line. You could have it that it goes in the middle of the line, in between, above, or completely perpendicular to the line. So for example, if we change something, notice that the number goes in between now the line. By clicking on the letter A, you will be able to change the information that happens in the values. For example, you could add some text. If you needed to add a note about this part, maybe if this part is repeated or the value is something specific, you could add either text before, after, above, or below, simply by selecting. So for example, you said normal. If you want something before, and then after, let's see, you want to say past, just to show you that you could have text added, and you could do the same thing process for above and below. This is useful when you have to create things like repetitions or additional notes that you will be needing for a particular dimension. Notice that you could also, let me remove this before. I could continue. Notice that you could add also decimal places. By default, it has 2 decimal places, but they don't show. I'll show you in a second where they're going to place. That they're going to be in the text settings. So notice that the text settings has a whole bunch of new different menus that you could use. This information that you have, once again, for tolerances, if you want to add the type of tolerances. This if you want to change the type of arrows or letters that you would like to use, if you want to add something. And text, you could add the type of units, what we have now. By default, it has 2 decimal places, and we have comma because that's the standard for millimeters. Notice that it shows the leading zeros, however it's not showing the trailing zeros. If you do want the trailing zeros to show, simply click here and then it will show up. Once again, you could change the orientation as the shortcut we had before. If you had format, if you wanted to show something specific for the particular dimension, and you could also change the particular size or type of font that you will like in your dimension. Notice, however, when you do the change, it is done for an individual value. If you like certain characteristic to be done for every single one of the dimensions, you have to do the change globally. That is done under Menu, Preferences, Drafting, and then you're going to go into Dimensioning. Notice that you have all the dimension information over here as we had before. For example, how you have the text, all the informations that you will have over here, or the symbols, the annotations, and the different components that you could have to change into your sketch. I would recommend you to go through each one of the menus to see what your preferences are. Those preferences are usually provided depending on the company you will be working. There might be a specific standard of how those drafting preferences are supposed to be. Also, the only thing that you should be aware is that once you change the preferences, the preference will activate from that moment forward. However, if you have dimensions that you have already created, you have to two choices. Either change them individually or erase them and regenerate them, and they will take into effect the changes that you did in the global menus over here. Now let's do some other type of views. Let's start by opening a new drawing. So A4, we're still drawing standalone in millimeters. We're going to create a base view. And notice the first thing that we have to do is select the part that we're going to do. We're not going to use the articulation rod. What we're going to use is going to be the piston that we had from the previous lecture. I'm going to place it. And notice that as soon as you do that, automatically it gives you the choices of doing views that are going to be projected from this base view. So you could have a side view, you could have a top view, or something in a particular angle. The views that we're going to do for this case are going to be a detail view and a cross-sectional view. Therefore, we are just simply going to close this menu. to avoid, we're gonna delete once again the borders that we're going to have, and we're gonna make it a little bit smaller so that we could have a better view of what we're doing. So let's start with a detail view. A detail view is used whenever you want to dimension parts that are too small compared to the part, and if you put the dimensions it becomes too busy. In this piston, for example, it will be this section over here. So what we would like to have is a detail view. So we click over here, and then we simply choose a center point, and then we create something like this, a circle, and then notice that then a detail view will be created. The detail view now is basically a picture of that little section that you created, and you could change the scale to make it larger or smaller in order to provide the dimensions. So now that this is larger, you could go and add as many dimensions, and it's not as busy as you will have it over here. The second type of direct view that we're going to do is a section view. A section view is basically the idea that we're not able to see the details of what happens in the inside, and we would like to create a cut of this, and so that it shows on the side. So we simply do a section view. We selected a point in the center, and then notice that we create a cutting plane. The cutting plane indicates that this piston is going to be cut at this location, and the location that I see is going to be looking at this direction, and this is what I see now. So notice that every place that is hatched, it means that it was cut by that particular plane, and anything that is not, it will simply belongs to the part and it is offset from that particular plane. So these are two of the different type of views that you could add in a drawing, and they are useful depending on the complexity of the part that you're trying to describe. Let's now learn how to create a drawing of a exploded assembly. To do that, the steps are: you need to open the actual assembly. So we're going to use the sub-assembly 2 that we used in the previous lecture. Once you are here, you go to the Assemblies tab, and you make sure that the exploded views, and you open the explosion 1 that is available. Once you are here, then you're going to go into File, and you're gonna change the mode or the preference mode that you have from modeling into drafting. You have to select the proper size. So in this case it's A4 for the letter size, and then you click OK. We're gonna skip the title block for now, and the wizard comes up. You're going to follow it. The trick here is that instead of the front view, you're gonna use the trimetric view as the primary view, and then you're gonna remove the remaining of the views, and then you click Finish. Notice that this process is a little bit different than what we have for parts, but it is required for you to be able to get the exploded drawing of your assembly. Before we move forward, I'm gonna remove the border of the view, Preference, Drafting, and unclick the display. I'm gonna move it a little bit, and now what we're gonna add is the parts list and the auto balloon to identify the parts. So we're gonna do parts list, and notice that as you click here, it would immediately create a table showing the parts that you're going to have. Notice that it tells you that there is 1 articulation rod, 1 piston, pin, and 2 plugs. And what we need to find is which part is which. For that we do the auto balloon. We click here and we select the parts list, and then we click OK. And notice that NX automatically provides the location of the balloons so that you could identify what part goes with which. Couple of suggestions when creating an assembly drawing. Notice that the part name that is provided in the table is exactly how it's saved in your particular part. So please make sure that it's spelled properly and that it's not too long or not too short to be able to provide the description of the part. Now we're going to show you how to modify a menu, or to populate the block that you're going to have over here. To do that, we simply go to drafting tools and we simply going to populate the title block. Notice that the menus will show up, and then you just have to type for each one of the particular parts if you didn't do this at the beginning.